In fact, every Mother's Day, and only during my mom's death anniversary and her birthday, I sort of started my own tradition. On her birthday, I would cook what would be her favorite. Well, it was our favorite dish that she makes almost every month, possibly. It's called bopes. It's a Kapampangan dish. And also on her death anniversary, we would often, I would force my kids to listen to two recordings of her singing. She wasn't a professional singer, but on this occasion, my sister recorded two songs that she sang sort of a cappella, and we would listen to that. As I look back, I think one of my greatest fears as a child is actually losing my mom, although she died when I was already in my 40s. But I can say that because I learned this song in third grade, something that you probably learned also. It goes something like this. I once had a dear old mother who how dearly she loves me, for when I was a baby, she took good care of me. And then the second verse says, one night as I lay down sleeping, my sister by my side, I heard a voice from heaven that says, my mother died. Today is more than just celebration. Today is, in fact, about a conviction. I understand that Mother's Day in our society and in our culture is such a beautiful thing. Flowers are bought and given, pictures are posted online, and numerous greetings from all over, right? By a phone, Instagram, social media, and restaurants are full, probably at this moment, even through the rest of the day. But beneath the flowers and Instagram posts, there is something deeper that God is calling us to do. And this is something that I would like to share with you today. I think beneath all the stories, we can think of the sleepless nights our mothers had, the hidden sacrifices, and the quiet prayers, and the endless love that they continue to shower to us. Just think of a mother in your life, or your own mother perhaps, and just remember the many things that they have done for you and on your behalf. Now, of course, I understand that some of our mothers are the less than ideal kind, so some of you may probably feel differently, but I think in general, it's helpful, not only on Mother's Day, to continue to keep in mind the things that mothers do for us. And let me say this to us this morning, that to honor our mothers is really more than just feeling sentimental about our mothers, but it's really moving into active care. It's beyond words, telling them, I love you, Mom, you're so nice, Mom, and all that. It's really about practical, active, consistent care. More than just feeling, it is actually doing. And let me lay out for us sort of a specific principle and then sort of a broad principle that we will derive from the passage we just read. Here's one. How we care for our parents reveals the depth of our devotion to God. I don't know if you've already made that connection before, but the passage makes it quite explicit. And you're probably questioning in your mind, what do you mean, Pastor? We're living independent lives. We have our own lives to live. We don't have enough resources to take care of our parents. I'm excused. I have things happening in my life. They're in a much better place than me and all that. Therefore, I don't have that obligation or commitment. But what I would like for you to understand this morning is how we relate to God impacts every aspect of life. And in a very specific sense, how we treat the people near us or those we say we love actually has a lot of bearing with regards to our devotion to God. If we are indeed totally devoted to God, as we claim to be, then that will easily manifest and flow out into the kind of practical care that the Apostle Paul is even going to mention here. On a broader scale, we can say that true spirituality is validated by the way we love our own family. In fact, I believe in what the old people say, a wisdom from them, when somebody told me a while back that if you want to know who this person that you are dating or your fiancé, if you want to learn more about them, go ahead, watch, and see how they treat their mothers. I don't know how accurate is that scientifically, but unfortunately in my case, Miriam's mom died when she was 9, so I never get to experiment on that, but I'm sure you have had your own experience, something similar to that. Or another person told me, if you want to see what your wife looks like in 60 years, just look at their mother now. What I'm simply saying is, the way we treat our loved ones, in particular our mothers, is really an evidence of how devoted we are to Jesus. Now, let me establish the context here, since this seemed to be a very strange passage to talk about on Mother's Day when it's talking about widows. This letter was written to Timothy. He was the pastor of Ephesus at this time. He was a very young pastor, possibly in his early 30s or late 20s. And Paul has written to him several times. The one that we have in our Bible is 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. And he was quite aware that Timothy may not be able to navigate through the complexities of a church like Ephesus with the many different house churches throughout the city. So one of the issues in chapter 5 that Paul needed to address is the issue of widows who are trying to, or families, I think it's more on the families who were trying to burden the church or offload the responsibility of caring for their widows. And possibly the situation is like this. There are two kinds of widows within the church in Ephesus. Those who are just like widows, ordinary members who are widows with no one to care for them, and those widows who are in fact serving in the church, and they have no other means of support except to receive from the church. It's very possible that at this point the church have managed to establish some kind of a safety net, if you may. There are no Social Security, there are no APS at this time, so the church seldom filled in the gap for those who have lost their husbands, since in this case economic status and economic well-being is really tied to the male or to the husband. Oftentimes, the only option for a widow is to actually remarry in order to survive economically. So for these widows who are already of age, for example, and marrying is no longer an option for them, the church sort of stepped in and took them under the church's care. But of course, just like any other welfare system, some people and some families in this case managed to sort of game the system, right? So now, even widows who actually have or still have a family support network are now being added to the list, and in return burdening the church and sort of limiting its capacity to truly care for those who are, as Paul would call them, truly widows. So just keep that in mind. That is the context here. And Paul essentially is going to say, we need to figure out, we need to define who are the recipients who are deserving of what we are doing as a church, because we could not accommodate everybody, especially those widows who still have their own family support network. Because in that sense, the family are just like, oh, we don't have to deal with grandma. You know, the church can take care of them, when in fact, they still have an existing support. So he wants them to prioritize and come up with a qualification. We will not cover all of the verses where that is mentioned, but I would like us to focus on these 5 or 6 verses that really sort of zooms in on the familial responsibility or the moral obligation of family members towards their parents. And in this case, Paul has elevated this to that of a moral, theological duty. This is akin to what Exodus chapter 20, which is the 10 Commandments, the 5th commandment says, honor thy mother and thy father. This is sort of the modern or New Testament articulation of the similar command. Now, let me read through the passage and then come back and sort of break down these key verses. Verse 3, give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. This is what I meant. There were widows who are being placed into the welfare or the church ministry widow welfare system who are not in fact deserving since they have existing family support. It says here, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, this should learn first, that is the children or grandchildren, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, that is the widow or parents, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Verse 5 and 6, the widow who is really in need, this is what we were talking about, left all alone, puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. Again, in that society, there is no APS, there is no Social Security, and if your husband died and you don't have children around to look after you, you are practically a destitute person, and this is where the church came in and said, we want to help you. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. This is an enigmatic statement, but essentially this is probably referring to those who have committed themselves to the church as widows, and they said, I'm going to commit and serve God, but then decided, for whatever reason, to drop off or drop out and remarry. It's not essentially condemning remarriage at this point. It's simply pointing out that some of those widows sort of enjoyed the system, but then decided to leave because they wanted to get married. Well, we'll leave it at that. There's a little bit more that is going on. But let's continue on with verse 7. So in general, Paul says, give these instructions, Timothy, so that no one may be open to blame, not subject to criticism. In verse 8, this is sort of a warning. The positive command and then a warning. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let me start off by saying that honor, as it is in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, as it is in the New Testament, is more than words and feelings. You cannot honor somebody, in this case your parents, by simply keeping that sense of, or that sentiment in your hearts. You cannot honor them with your hearts without any corresponding actual care. In fact, what we will see in what Paul said in verse 3, give proper recognition. This is really sort of a dynamic equivalent of the expression, honor the widows. And it's important to understand that honoring in this case is really assigning value to something. In fact, sometimes it's used in commercial terms as assigning a price or assigning a weight. So when we honor someone, we are actually saying, you are so important to me so that I'm going to support you, or so that I'm going to care for you. There is a direct correspondence to how we are treating a person and to the kind and amount of care that we're going to provide for that person. So if we say we honor, in this case, honor the widows, that is, provide for them physically, financially, and materially, it's not just simply saying, hey, we appreciate you, grandmas, or we appreciate you, moms, but it's actually coming up with a tangible way to support them. You can think of honor really as a total orientation of life. This is really about looking after another person's well-being. We cannot just throw it in as some kind of a holiday cheer to people and say, hey, Happy Mother's Day, we honor you, moms. It's got to be accompanied by something more direct and more concrete. In fact, what Paul is telling Timothy here is something that would cost him. If you honor, you provide. If you honor someone, you would use resources that are your own. If you honor someone, you need to be there. If you honor someone, that person needs to feel you, perhaps even in a physical sense. And it is consistent, practical care, not just on Mother's Day. Well, thankfully, we have Mother's Day, but if your only way of showing your parents that you love them or your mom that you love them is only on a 2-minute call on Mother's Day, that's hardly the kind of honoring that is in mind here. It is actually showing up on ordinary days, not just on their birthdays, not on anniversaries, but every time that you get the chance. Occasional appreciation is not honor. Honor is showing up even on ordinary days. So in this context, honoring parents is really about financial and physical provision. Now, if you have aging parents today, I am fully aware of how much it costs to place our loved ones in an assisted living facility, for example. It's real money and real dollars. And many would even say, it's just too much. I'm going to let the government take care. Let's Medicare, Social Security, medical, or some nonprofit deal with my mom's situation. Because I just can't do it. I don't have the means and the resources. But if you want to honor your parents, I'm sure there's got to be a way to continue to show support, whether physically, financially, emotionally, or spiritually. Just making them feel all the time that they are not alone. Again, the way we think of honor is we are presuming a certain worth on that person. If you say that your mom is important to you or your parent is important to you, it's not just a mental, intellectual appraisal of things. It is accompanied by real, concrete actions that would probably require resources from our end. So honor the widows here can be extended to mean that we are to honor our parents. Because that is exactly what Paul is saying, that those who have been negligent on their duty to care for their widows and wanted the church to take on that responsibility, is sort of rebuking them. Do you not realize that this is what honoring means when you care for your widows and your parents at that? But there is a lot more that Paul is going to sort of place on top of this requirement. He's going to tell us that godliness, in fact, begins at home and not at church. I know we can be accused of having what is called a split-level Christianity, where we show off a different kind of spirituality when we are at church or among Christian friends and when we are at home. But Paul says there is no such a thing. In fact, what you are at home or in your household spiritually is what you really are. Because real spirituality or godliness at that begins at home. It's not measured by church attendance, but it's measured by how we care and love for our family members. Look at what 1 Timothy 4 says, or verse 4 says. But a widow who has children or grandchildren, so they still have an intact support system, should learn first of all to put their religion into practice. Now this is again sort of an expanded translation, which this word in fact literally means first learn godliness in your own household. Godliness is essentially equivalent to spirituality, the way we relate to God, our devotion and commitment to God. So Paul is saying, if you are not caring for your family members, in this case the widow, you are failing in your spirituality. There is a big question mark over your devotion to Jesus, because you are not acting out the very faith that you claim you have. If the closest relationships we have in this world are within the household or within our home, our marriage, and our children, what better way to test the validity of one's profession but in the manner, in the way that they care for those who are closest to them? Isn't that the case? And in fact, it's kind of scary how our spouse and our children can easily object to things that people say about us. Isn't that scary when people would praise you for something and they said, "Oh, you're an awesome, wonderful person," and in the back seat your kid is like, "I don't know about that." Or your wife, the worst part is as a preacher, for example, your wife is sitting in the pews and saying, "I don't believe him." Yeah? Because godliness is first practiced in the home. And in fact, you could sort of tweak this and say, what godliness looks like is modeled first in the home. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you are, in fact, the exemplar of what it's like to follow Jesus. And your kids and your children are looking up to you. They would know if you are a follower of Jesus indeed. And in this case, our family, not only for pastors, but for every believer, our family is our first ministry. Now let me qualify that, because it's very possible to turn our family into an idol. Right? I know many of us here can easily claim, "I'm a family person. I'm a family guy. It's family first, family first." But that's not what the Bible says. It's God first, right? And then family. But in terms of ministry and the expression of our faith and devotion and commitment to Jesus, the first to experience that and receive that, if you may, would be your family. Your family. And Paul is insisting that these kids and grandkids of these widows are reneging on a fundamental faith assertion. They're reneging on their commitment to Jesus when they do not, or they have neglected caring for their widows or parents at this point. Practicing religion begins at home. In this sense, then, everything that we do at home for our family can be considered as an expression of godliness. When you go visit your mom, if you're not living together, and doing some grocery shopping for her, that can be an act of worship. When you show up at the unexpected time and just sit there and watch a movie and listen to your mom and pay attention to her and just be fully present, that is in fact a spiritual act. It's not just praying. It's helping fix the faucet or mowing the lawn perhaps, or picking up the mail or sending care packages to them if they're living away from you. They can be treated as expressions of godliness. Whatever it is that we do for our loved ones as believers, the Apostle Paul says, is in fact an expression of our faith and devotion and commitment to Jesus. This is no different from when he said, for example, that whatever it is that you do, whether you eat or drink, even the most trivial activity can be done for the glory of God. In the same manner, what we do for our parents, what we do for our moms, how little it may be, or how trivial it may be, is something that can be done to the glory and honor of God. So the widow, with a support system, are supposed to be cared for by the children or grandchildren. But also here, we are given sort of the theological grounding, if you may, why this should be carried out. This should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their family and so repaying their parents and grandparents. This is where a lot of us would probably disagree and say, what do you mean we have to repay our parents? Well, the assumption here is you have a debt to your parent. Don't tell me now I've already paid it off. I mean, I've done a lot of chores in my lifetime. Do you know how many times I have to take my mom to work? That should count towards the debt or whatever debt I may have. But if we're honest about it, we will never be able to fully repay our parents. Can we? Is it possible at all to get to a point in our life and say, Mom, Dad, I'm done with you. I've logged everything that I've done for you and compared it to everything that you've done for me. Guess what? It's quits. It's even out now. I have no more obligation towards you. This is akin or very similar to what most Asian societies or cultures have, that is a debt of gratitude. But it really means, in this context, repaying or making a recompense. It's making a requital. It is reciprocating what has been done for you or on your behalf. So he said, when we honor our parents in this case, and when we provide for them, when we care for them, that is really a way of repaying them for all the care that they have provided for us. It's not that parents are requiring that, but as you would see, we experience what is called a cycle of reciprocity. The first line there at the top, when we are born into this world, we become the recipient of all the care from our parents. But as we get older, we become the provider of that care towards our parents. And there is sort of this point where, in our adulthood, perhaps in our 30s, 40s, when we are established and all that, then we're requiring lesser and lesser care from our parents. But at this point, our parents are the ones that are needing more and more care. And this is exactly what Paul says. We need to repay. We will be at a point in our life when we will be providing the care more than receiving the care from them. Now, of course, I understand in our society, there's a lot of parents who are hesitant. In fact, they would rather not be helped. And they can be adamant and stubborn at times and say, I don't need your help. I don't need your help. Stop sending me money. Stop showing up. I don't need your help. And again, that may be, those are probably special situations or occasions, but it's not uncommon. But nonetheless, the command for us is to reciprocate our parents. I don't know where you are at right now, economically or socially. There is no excuse as a follower of Jesus for us not to take a step towards reciprocating our parents in whatever way or means possible for us. We cannot just simply say their duty or their rule or whatever, their what do you call that? I was under their charge for 18 years and now I'm emancipated. I don't need anything from them and I don't need to repay them or anything. No, the scripture tells us as a follower of Jesus, as a believer, it glorifies God that we reciprocate our parents. That is what Paul says. Repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Every act of family care is seen by God and delights Him. It pleases God that we are caring for our loved ones and our parents. In this case, what we do for our moms and for our dads at that is really an act of worship. And when we honor God, or we honor our parents at that, we glorify God as well. Now, Paul, to make this really, really serious, leaves us with a warning against neglectful children. What is neglect? There is obviously a legal definition to it, it's a medical definition to it. Essentially, if a loved one is not provided the basic necessities of life, for example, or not afforded protection in this sense in order for them to, let's say, thrive or survive, then that is some kind of a neglect. I guess that's just a rough definition. But in this case, Paul says, those of you who are burdening the church by bringing over your widows and your grandmas and mothers to be cared for by the church, here's a warning for you, he says. In verse 7, give people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So Paul essentially is saying, if you fail to honor your parents, you open yourself up to criticism in the sense that the integrity of the gospel or your own Christian faith is in fact challenged. You cannot be a devoted, committed follower in Jesus and Bible stomping, hands raising kind of a Christian and neglect your parents at the same time. It just doesn't happen that way. Also, he says, you are contradicting the very things that you profess to be true. If you, in fact, worship a loving Heavenly Father and yet fail to act in a loving manner to your earthly mother, what good is that? You deny the faith. You emptied the faith with its meaning. You undermine the very things that you are standing on spiritually if you do not care for your parents. Whew, this is probably the harshest warning in all of the New Testament. If you do not provide or care for your family members, you are worse than an unbeliever. That's just another way of saying it is as if you have never professed faith in Jesus. It is as if you have never ever believed in Jesus. It is as if you have never ever been saved. Or that you are not a Christian at all from the very beginning. If you fail to care for your parents in this context, you are nullifying the very faith that you thought you had. What can be more stern and serious than that? I think you can now appreciate why we need to care for our mothers. As I have mentioned, how we care for our parents reveals the depth of our devotion to God. In fact, you can do an experiment. If you want to know how spiritual somebody is, assuming that their parents are still alive, you could always speak to their mother privately. Your mother-in-law too, you can speak to her. Speak to them privately and ask what kind of a person you're dating, or your spouse, or your friend. Because again, would be very telling that the manner that we treat our parents could easily correlate to the kind of faith and belief that we have for God. There is no way to divorce the two. There is no such thing as private spiritual life and then you have familial life, public familial life. They're actually bound so intricately that one impinges upon the other. So how do you care for your parents? Is your care for your parents matches the profession of your faith or the faith that you profess? Is there a direct correspondence to what we say in church or what we say to people about our faith and love for God and all that, and to the kinds of things that our parents are experiencing regularly with us? Let's begin by auditing our honor. Let's begin by examining how our love for them is in fact coupled with real, practical things at that. Let's do an honest audit. I don't know, maybe look at our bank statement, our calendar. That would be the most practical things to look at. And see where or when your mom or your parents even became part of that. Let's sort of examine ourselves and try to understand, what are we doing towards our parents? Are we, in fact, consistently practicing our faith in the way that we are relating to our parents? Many people would often ask me as a chaplain, what do you do when you show up and visit patients? A lot of it is I'll just sit down next to the patient if they are in bed. And the two most common interventions, as we call them, is really ministry of presence, and the other one is active listening. Literally, I would sit for minutes and talk to them if they are able to. If they're cognitively impaired, then I would just look at them and we try to look at each other if they can hold eye contact. If not, then I'm just going to be there like another warm body next to them, and even perhaps hold their hands in prayer and all that. Just being present. I know you're going to tell me, Pastor, there's many different ways that we can be present, virtually, digitally, and pretty soon hologram or perhaps a robot with your face on it. I don't know. But we're talking about real presence. This is not just walking into your mother's kitchen and getting whatever food you have and checking the refrigerator and taking whatever you want and say, bye, Ma. Thank you for the adobo. I'll come back next time. When is the next schedule? Probably what we need, and some of us may need to do now, is to just be with our mother or father. If you can, if you are able to, just be there. I know you may probably say, I can't understand Mama anymore. She doesn't recognize me. She's incoherent most of the time, and she's annoying and all that. But to the very end, we are social beings. And the presence of another warm body changes us. Showing up, just being fully present, not always working through social media on your phone, and just really paying attention, just looking them in the eye. You'll be surprised, for example, is a little trick that I've learned, that when you talk to people, when you sort of level with them, if they're seated in a wheelchair or if they are lying down, if you level with them and face them, like literally face them squarely like that, you'll be surprised how much they would respond to you. But our problem is we think we're present when we are just lost in our own little world while being in the immediate vicinity and count that as presence. That's not presence. Presence may also involve what is called active listening. Active listening is probably, for some of us, we probably need to pause. 10 seconds perhaps? That's the average time, by the way, that the doctors would butt in. Though they would give patients a time to actually talk. 10 seconds, less than 10 seconds actually. They would immediately say something. And imagine if we give somebody, a loved one at that, a few more seconds, maybe 15 or 30 seconds, before we start talking and just listen to them, it would truly make a difference. Be present. Virtually, okay, we'll grant that. Go FaceTime, Zoom, whatever. Spend as much time as you can. my dad, my mom passed away, but my dad lives in the Philippines, so I just do messenger with him. But my wife would ask me, what did you talk about, Daddy? With you and Dad, what did you talk about? We'd talk about just anything. From theology to technology to legal issues, current events, things of that. So we just go on and on and on. Nothing. We're just talking. Just trying to be present, in this case, digitally. But that's probably what you need to do. You probably need to schedule a visit, or probably you need to look up your vacation calendar and say, I need to go back to the Philippines. I need to see Mom all over again. Don't wait until they're not able to respond to you well, or that they're not fully capable to respond to you in person. Don't wait for the doctor's call before you visit them. See them now. Be present. Speak to them. Listen to them. And perhaps the most difficult part is lift the burden. So we don't want to be just all talk. I love you, Mom. Here's the flower. Here's the card. I'll send you $200 tomorrow. Maybe they need actual physical health today. You probably heard it from the Surgeon General that loneliness is an epidemic. And a good number of our elderly population, mothers at that, are living on their own. Again, there's probably an exception to most Asian families where we really want everybody to live in the same place. That can be a good thing, and of course it has its own share of issues. But if you're far away from your parents, there are different ways that you can still make your help be felt. You can provide emotional support, long distance. You can provide financial help, long distance. You can help manage their finances. For example, you can help with their doctor's appointment if you're living in the area. There's plenty of little things that we could do. It could be financial, physical, or emotional. But remember, they are at a point in their life where they are in need of help and care. They have gotten past the time when they were the one providing care. The caregiver is now the patient or the recipient of care. And you are the one who's assuming the position of a caregiver. We provide, we protect them, we make sure that their well-being, their issues and concerns are being dealt with or addressed adequately. Let me take you back to our main principle here. True spirituality is validated by the way we love our family. You know, honestly, I could not gauge where you are at spiritually. There's no way to do that. The state of your heart is something that is only known to God. I mean, you could say all kinds of things about your own spirituality and how you describe yourself spiritually. We can be lost in words. But the Apostle Paul in this passage is telling us there is a practical way to, in fact, measure that. By looking at how we love, or we are loving, our mothers, our fathers, and our families. That's where true spirituality is. It's not in our familiarity with the scriptures or how spiritual we sound or the kinds of verses we post on social media and making ourselves appear like we are super hyper spiritual, whatever. But I would like to talk to your mom and to your dad. Let's see how that spirituality is being played out in the way you treat them. Amen?